I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. This is great. What a great event and what a great audience to have all of you together here.
So, and it's such a treat to be able to speak to a bona fide expert. I think we should start probably with understanding a little bit more about Corteva. It's a new type of company. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came about?
Yeah, so as you all know, there's been a lot of consolidation in the agricultural industry over the last several years, and our company was maybe one of the first to start going down this road. And really, I think as we get into the discussion today, you'll probably see why. Just some of the challenges globally that we're facing with climate change, with population growth, with changing consumers and consumer preferences with food. It was time for a change in agriculture. And so in 2015, towards the end of the year, the merger was announced between Dow and DuPont. So as you can imagine, two very pillar foundational companies that had ag presence, but also many other businesses. $130 billion of market cap coming together to form then Dow DuPont. And the plan all along was that it wasn't going to stay as Dow DuPont, that we were actually going to spin out three different companies. And one would be Dow, which is now probably the largest of those three companies, DuPont, which I think all of you are kind of familiar with. It's not too far from here in Wilmington, and then Corteva. So Corteva is the agricultural company. We are about 8 months old now. We just stood ourselves up last June 1st, and $14 billion startup of revenue, of sales each year, and really it's a pure play agricultural company taking DuPont, their crop protection, and the Pioneer seed business, and putting it together with Dow Agriscience's seed and crop protection business as well. And so we're through the merger. It's a great time now because we have a strategy, we have a plan, and we have a great pipeline of innovation that we're delivering. Our core businesses right now are really within the seed. We're number one seed company for the major row crops in the world: corn, soybean, sunflower, canola, as well as crop protection. We're the number one company for agricultural insecticides, and number 3 and number 4 for fungicides and herbicides. But I don't think that is really who we are, honestly. I think the merger was a great time to also look at ourselves and say, what kind of company do we want to be? Do we want to be just a seed and a crop protection company? No. So actually we redefined ourselves and what kind of company we actually are. And it was a great time to do it because we're all coming together from different backgrounds and say, what do we want to be? So we want to identify ourselves really with who we serve. And so our company is about serving growers to help them to succeed, to serve customer and consumer needs. And so if you look at our mission statement is really to enrich the lives of those who produce and those who consume, to ensure progress for generations to come. So nowhere does it say feed the world, nowhere does it say really about the products that we develop. And this mission statement, this gives us permission to be agnostic. And we're really about how we work in this ecosystem of growers, of customers, of population, of climate, of the land that we work. And so even our name is new and it's hard to pronounce. And I was working with Morella at the beginning.
I was like, how do you say it?
Is it Corteva? And I'm like, don't say Corteva. I got a nasty gram from my boss when I said that one time. It's Corteva. And so when you break that down, what is Corteva? So it's actually an artificial word, but there's two roots to that word. So cor is heart, and I think a lot of you know that speak Latin languages. Cor is another word for heart, and teva is an ancient word meaning land. And so Corteva is really the heart of the land. And so that's really, in essence, who we are as a company, is we're here to serve those that produce with the land.
And I can see how passionate you are about this, and I know that you have a unique background. Can you tell us a little bit about why you find this work to be interesting and important? Because I can sense the passion as you're describing it.
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in Michigan, and so some of my earliest memories were actually with my grandpa, with my father, milking cows at 4 a.m. It was just so exciting to get up and to do this, and riding the tractor. And I would always wander around outside in the gardens and in the fields, really looking at how things worked. I was always really interested in how you can put a seed in the ground and somehow that turns into a plant through the year, and how all of those changes, and how the weeds would come every year no matter what, and how the weather could just in an instant wipe out an entire year's production. And so it was really just that love of what farmers do and the power of what they do with Mother Nature to produce food that all of us then benefit from. And so that, in essence, is kind of what drew me to it. I'm a curious person, so I tended to drive more to the science side and the innovation side. I'll leave the business side to all of you. But we can talk about, they're very much intertwined, and as we go forward, we're going to have to work together, both the business and the innovation aspects, to solve some of the problems we have.
Well, and the problems are huge.
They are huge.
Given the landscape of the changes to our environment, global challenges that no one industry can solve, but we must all address. What do you see to be the biggest challenge that you at Corteva have to address, and how do you begin to do that?
Yeah, so like I said, our core focus is to serve the growers, to enable them to be successful, to serve the consumers, which are all of us. And the problems, as you said, Marella, are huge. I mean, if you look at where we are right now, in the next 30 years, we're going to add probably over 2 billion people to this planet, and a lot of those in areas that are already experiencing food insecurity, and those areas also, as we overlay climate change, will also be even more exasperating the problems that they have. 2 billion people, it's hard to kind of imagine what that means, but if you look at that and break it down, that means adding another entire population of the US onto this planet every 5 years or less, and that's what it looks like. So I think in all of your careers in your lifetime, just that number of people as we go up to 2050, we will start feeling that. At the same time, the climate is changing, and we're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the air every year, and we need to actually figure out a way to slow that. I think there's been a lot of research with the Paris Accord that is setting goals to say we need to keep that at 2% or less for us to be sustainable, to have a chance to be sustainable on this planet, which means in real terms that we need to cut the emissions by 50% in the next 10 years, and then to be carbon neutral by 2050. And so this is a pretty daunting challenge, because with agriculture and with farmers, they have 3 megatrends coming at them. One is population growth. They're going to need to produce more food in the next 30 to 40 years than we've produced as humanity in the last 10,000. So we've been doing agriculture as a species for about 10,000 years. We need to take all of the food that we've produced in that 10,000 years and produce that much in the next 30 to 40 years in order to have a chance to feed this population. So that's one. At the same time, the climate is changing, which means some areas are going to be more productive, some areas are going to be less productive. But we need to figure out where they are and to put the solutions in place. So the climate is changing, so there's one aspect of just dealing with that with agriculture, but the other is to prevent it from getting worse. And so trying to enable farmers to actually be sustainable, to have the tools that they need to be sustainable with these major challenges coming at them. So our focus is not on one particular technology. Our focus is really on how can we enable our farmers to deal with this.
Okay. Can you give us some specifics? I was hoping for game-changing technology.
Yeah. So I think there's not going to be one scalable technology that is going to work across the entire agriculture ecosystem. Markets are different. Countries are going to be impacted by both population growth and climate change differently. But some of the things that we are looking at and what we can look at are digital technology, having the data that we can actually predict where climate change is going to impact, which crops are going to succeed there, and then start developing through breeding or through gene editing technology the crops that will be likely to survive and to prosper in those environments. Also, in a more mature market where you can actually use digital technology, you can do a lot with optimizing inputs, optimizing which varieties or hybrids are placed in different fields. And so our granular software is really working on that, about making sure growers can place the highest potential genetics in the areas that have the most benefit, and also recommending how much nutrients, how much nitrogen to place there. So in some cases, you don't need as much nitrogen as we're applying. When you do a blanket application, in some cases the crop does need all of that, in other cases it's just lost. And we have a lot of issues also with runoff of nutrients, and so looking at digital technology as a way to help that. Breeding is a tool that we've been doing for the 10,000 years that we've been in existence as a species doing agriculture, but it's a technology that's just as important right now. If you look at what we're actually producing in the last 100 years, in 1920, so our founder of the pioneer part of our company, Henry Wallace, he came with this concept of hybrid crops, hybrid corn. And that was what started the industry. At that time, we were getting about 25 bushels per acre for corn. And then 100 years later, in 2020, the average yield is 170. Down the road here, right here in Virginia on the James River, we're working with a farmer that is getting over 600 bushels per acre with his crops, with his corn crop. And so you can see the potential. So he's managing all of his inputs. These plants are very well manicured and maintained on a daily basis. That's not what farmers do generally. But you can see the potential for both management and continual breeding to improve our productivity. And just to kind of put that in scale too, if you were actually able to get the top 20 corn producing countries in the globe up to the level of yield that the US was in 20 years ago, in 2000, we would actually be able to take 100 million acres out of production that we wouldn't need. And so just that ability to raise the productivity of a crop on an acre that we are farming is going to be a huge tool that we're going to actually need to use going forward to produce as much food as we're going to need in the next 30 to 40 years. So there's a couple. I think another one is really looking at technology to control pests. So pests, as we go into new areas and new geographies with climate change is also enabling pests and diseases that weren't problems before now to become problems. They're finding niches as these new climatic changes are taking place. And so farmers do need solutions on how to ensure that their crops are healthy through the growing season. And so those will continually be important tools for growers as they are really charged with feeding the world. So those are a few.
And I'll ask another question, and as I do, for those of you who have questions, please feel free to come up to the microphone. We invite you to converse with Wendy.
Yeah.
I see the passion and I see the big picture. And I also see that you've said many scary words for those who might be a bit nervous about runoff, about the type of seed production, and I can imagine that Corteva faces pretty significant criticism sometimes. What are those, and how do you begin to address the individuals who might have that reaction to some of the necessary evils that some might say are apparent in agriculture?
Yeah, so I think agriculture, as a lot of our systems, economic systems, we evolve. And so the agricultural system that we've been in for the last 100 years is one that is taking acres, putting them into tillage, maximizing the yields from those acres, in some cases taking more acres and bringing them in. In developed nations, we're now really looking at optimizing the use of those acres and identifying the problems and starting to solve them. So in one problem that we identified maybe 20 years ago is just soil erosion and the impact that that has on the soil structure, the soil future. And we've started working in the majority of the North America production of corn and soybeans is now in no-till. And so this practice alone has reduced a tremendous amount of erosion, of runoff, and then also maintain soil structure. So this was something that the industry had to do. From a seed perspective, we needed to generate genetics and seed that could grow in such a system that didn't have to have a very fluffy soil bed every year, that you could actually just plant in and it's going to grow. And so that is one thing that's been accomplished. On the other side, the equipment industry needed to come with equipment that could actually operate and plant into systems where there's biomass and there's soil that's not, fluffy and have been recently worked. So that's one. I think another one is just optimizing the use of our inputs, of particularly the fertilizers. And so a couple of things that we've been working on and that are already out in the market. One is a nitrogen stabilizer. So actually, this is something that you put with the crop, and it actually will stabilize the nitrogen in a form that is not prone to leaching. And so that's available through the cropping season and can be used by that crop. So really much less runoff of the nitrogen leaching into the soil. Another one that we're also actively looking at is targeted crop protection. So this is where we, instead of blanket, apply a crop protection product across an entire field, where we actually look at using drones and scouting where are the problems in that field, and then use an application that's only in those areas. So in some cases, we're actually doing drone application now, and so you can actually get very in specific parts. If it's an orchard, you can go to specific trees, but being much more targeted in how we're using these solutions instead of just blanketing them. And also the digital to really try to manage that. I think some of the things that looking forward, really looking at cropping systems. And so incorporating systems, farmers, especially in North America, are primarily on one season crop. One season, and then we have it fallow over the winter. What about putting in a second crop? In some cases, there are crops that can overwinter, and you can have a second crop, cover crops. Those are things that we're starting to look at within our company right now in terms of these farming systems to enable crops on the ground in the field year-round.
Thank you. Great.
Great, we got some questions.
I'm Lindsay Walsh from Mary Baldwin University, also raised on a dairy and poultry farm, so
Excellent.
I
Yes.
resonate those 4 a.m. mornings. But I just also wondered, especially closer to me in Swope, there's a really unique model with the polyface and how they try to prevent some of the chemicals entering the system by rotating crops and animals in sequence. So are you studying anything like that? And then I'm also interested in hydroponics and how that might help us with our food shortage coming up. So what kinds of processes and other growing methods do you guys research there?
Yeah, so I think the cropping systems with animals, we don't have much, our business doesn't have much to do with animals other than providing a lot of the seed for alfalfa and silage corn that will go through an animal. We do have also a pasture and land management business that provides products for range and pasture. But that, I think, as we start incorporating animals into those systems, especially as we look long-term, the health of these ecosystems with a crop, with animals entering into them as well in terms of replenishing prairie land, replenishing pastures. I think this is an area that we're currently not in, but that could be absolutely part of the solution. And I think the second part of your question on hydroponics, you can see a lot of movement towards vertical farming, and especially around major city centers where you've got essentially old abandoned warehouses that have been converted into indoor farms, and they're able to produce fresh lettuce, salads, some smaller vegetables to bring to restaurants and grocery stores directly in there. And so there is a lot of potential there. Is it going to solve the entire challenge that we have? No. But will it solve part of it? Yes. And there are, I think there's a lot of innovation in those spaces right now to make the systems more energy efficient, to be able to recycle the nutrients. There's a lot of work on even the waste products, the bio-waste products from those facilities being returned into fertilizer. So it's almost like a closed loop system. And I think that as much as we can, both internal, like in indoor agriculture, as well as external agriculture, if we can make these systems closed loop, where we're keeping the crop residue in the field, we're replenishing it, we're keeping cover crops, we're keeping those systems of how Mother Nature actually intended it intact while we're innovating to produce food off of those same acres. I think that's really where we need to go. So I think, again, it's not going to be a one solution. We have to innovate in all of these different areas, because the needs and the opportunities, we're not going to be able to set up indoor farms in areas of the world that are starving. We need to get them just basic production so that they can feed themselves. But for urban city centers, absolutely, it's a great tool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, yes, Stephen Leff here from the Darden School. Thanks for coming here today.
Yeah.
You talked about the mega trend of world population growth and just increasing yields. There's also, movements that could affect yields on the downside.
Yes.
These are organic farming practices without use of synthetic pesticides or even pesticides at all, non-GMO foods, movements against industrial monocropping, deforestation, to produce more arable land. So there seems to be a tension between these things at times. So how do you deal with that or how do you think about that as a company?
Yeah. So I think I'll maybe make it really personal for you. So I grew up on a farm, as you know. My sister also grew up on a farm, and she's 2 years younger than me, and so I wanted to probably work on bigger problems in agriculture. She wanted to work on really exactly what you said. So she lives not too far from here in Yadkinville, North Carolina, has an organic farm, and her husband are completely self-sufficient. They grow all of their own food, and then they sell their excess at the farmer's market. And they use no pesticides, they use crop rotations, they use all of the things that you talked about. I'm working in a different way. When we come together at Thanksgiving dinner, all of our kids are playing together. She's asking me, how would this work? Do you have any agronomic practices that could help me out here? I'm saying, what do you do about these insects then if you're not able to treat them? And so we have a very rich dialogue. There's never conflict. It's never an anti, because we have a tremendous amount of respect for what each other do. Mm-hmm. And I would say that is where we are as an industry, as Corteva, and as an industry within agriculture, because these problems are so big now that we cannot say our technology is against yours. It clearly is going to have to be all of these technologies put together and really optimize where and how they're used, and to create an environment that they can coexist in order for us to be able to do this sustainably and to ensure our existence as a species beyond 2050. And so I honestly don't, and I think that's the beauty of Corteva, is we're not married to a certain technology. We're very open. We have organic insecticides that we sell, and we have biologicals that we also sell. So we're looking, and we've just put together sustainable innovation goals to make sure that our chemistry continues. Last year, I think, and we've probably as a company won more green chemistry awards than any other company in the industry. It's who we are. It is to be sustainable and to be technology agnostic, solution focused. And so I think that is going to be who we are going forward as well. And maybe my little relationship with my organic farmer sister is just kind of a microcosm of that.
Thank you. Go over here.
Hi, I'm Madison. I'm from Radford University. I had a question. So I'm a biologist, and so I wanted to know what I can be doing to add value and almost bridge the gap in the business industry, if you had any advice on that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I know where Radford is because
Please, somebody
I'm a
does.
Virginia Tech alumni, so maybe some of you all were back in the kind of the state at least. And so as a biology major, I think, what can you do in the business? I think one thing that we really need to all focus on is trying to understand each other a lot better. And I think the science, to me, is very intuitive and clear. Business is not. For you, it's probably you're in the lucky position to have some skin in both games. And so even communicating is one thing that you can be doing, because if we're not communicating well, it becomes us versus them. It becomes this is not going to work because, or this will work because. But also using your business knowledge on biology to be able to see those technologies that can apply. Because honestly, at the end of the day, farmers are entrepreneurs as well. They need to make money to have their operations be sustainable. And so we can come out with great technology, but if it's not going to enable them to be profitable, it's not going to go. And so with a business married to a science and technology background, to see whether these crazy ideas that we come up with have business value at a company level or at a grower level, and then also to communicate that. I think those are two things really to put business value on biology, science, innovation, and then communicate to be that translator between. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Kind of building off that question, my name is Adam Potrabowski from the UVA Darden School of Business. We talk a lot about stakeholders today and how we manage our businesses. And how does Corteva manage the complex relationships between your growers, your regulatory bodies, your research and innovation? And how do you ensure that there's continuous feedback between all of your stakeholders?
That's a great question, because there's another stakeholder that we're focused maybe even more heavily on now that you didn't mention, and that's also the consumer. And so we'll get to that. But those stakeholders that you mentioned, really our employees, the growers, to make sure that we're actually developing the solutions that will bring value to them, and then the regulators to make sure that those solutions can actually be sold to the growers. So I think one of the benefits that we also have with our business is we're present in 140 countries, and the model that we have is really intimate with the farmer. So we actually, with the Pioneer brand as kind of the flagship brand that we do this, it's farmers have an individual rep that they will go and purchase their seed and a lot of their other needs from, that they have a relationship. It's an ongoing thing over years that person actually helps them to plan what they're going to plant. So that knowledge that we get from the customer at a very intimate level, it's not going through an intermediary, this is the person who is buying it, and to have that level of insight from them that can then penetrate back into our organization to also say what other challenges are they facing, so that we can get ahead in terms of innovating to solve those. With the regulatory, I think where we are in a lot of cases is that the regulatory system is behind where the technology is. And so in some technology areas, crop protection, it's very mature. We kind of know what we need to do, but also the requirements are changing as there's more need for greener chemistry. So really working with the regulators, this is something that we need to do as we're bringing out different types of technology, is to start engaging quite early. So a couple years ago, we came out with a product for using gene editing. And there was no regulations in the U.S. about that. It was sort of considered a breeding, we were considering that a breeding technology, because it's just really making changes within the genome that would always happen in Mother Nature to that magnitude. It's not taking something from one species and putting it in another. It's just sort of, tweaking something that's already in the genome, as Mother Nature has done for centuries. But there was no regulations in place. And so what we actually had to do was take this concept to the USDA and say, am I regulated? And ask them, am I regulated with this? And they're, after a lot of consultation about understanding the technology and understanding what that was, the answer was no. you're not regulated. This falls under what we would consider breeding. So we're having to do the same thing with drones and drone applications right now, because those are considered aerial applications. There's no difference right now in the regulations between with applying a chemical from an airplane, a helicopter, or a drone. But there's some pretty big advantages to being able to precisely target different areas with drones. So I think that's how we do it with regulators. With the consumers, I mean, we are really trying to make sure that we have a sense of what market shifts, what preference shifts consumers are wanting. We're hearing a lot more with plant-based protein. We are a plant company, so this is just great opportunity for us, but we want to make sure we're getting that signal right, and also the traceability. And so we're interacting. Last year I spoke at the IFT meeting, the International Food Technology Institute, about if you're in food, you're in ag, and if you're in ag, you're in food. Our industries are completely tied together. And this ecosystem is going to become even more important as we go forward. Finance will be having to work with agriculture, will be having to work with regulations, with government. These problems are too big to tackle within an industry. It has to be a collaboration across industries. It's a great question, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sahara. I'm a student at the BARD MBA in Sustainability. Wendy, thank you for being here. I think I speak for everyone when I said the statement you made about the sheer amount of food that has to be produced within the next 30 years is quite alarming. I've read and heard from multiple sources that feeding the world is a matter of distribution rather than production.
Yes.
I'm wondering what your stance on that is and how you see Corteva, like how you envision Corteva like in that work.
Yeah, and so I think this is, again, and you're absolutely right, because we have a tremendous amount of food waste because we don't have all of the infrastructure systems for trade, import, export, getting the product out of the field into. Just an example in Brazil that we struggle with our growers is, the growers that are in the central part of Brazil, they either have to go to the Amazon or they have to go out to the coast. But you're talking about thousands of miles to having to transport what they're producing to get it to able to be to a port that they can get it out. And frankly, a lot of times the economics are not in favor of even harvesting that crop, and so then it goes to waste. So that is something that our company is not going to fix, but absolutely we need to be a part of that within this ecosystem. As we talk with governments and as we talk with businesses, we need to also be investing in infrastructure. If you look at where climate change is going to most likely impact negatively, those countries are the poorest. The countries that are already producing a lot of the world's food, just ironically, are going to have better climate opportunities with this. It's going to be warmer, it's going to be more rain. And those that are suffering already, it's going to get worse. And so we as human beings need to make sure that we have the import-export infrastructure in place to ensure that we can continue to get food to these places that are not going to be able to produce as much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Cameron from Duke's Fuqua School of Business, and my question is, how do you balance the need for innovation in this space with ethical practices, specifically around like animal testing?
Yeah, so the ethical animal testing, I mean, there's not a whole lot that we as a company get in. We do, like for a lot of our products for crop protection and biotech traits, they need to go through regulatory studies with animal testing, but that's more to meet the regulatory criteria. But in terms of animal testing for the things that we do internally, most of our products don't really have that need. But I think the ethics piece that you bring up is really important, and I think it goes to this where we're all trying to solve in the future. We can either choose in the developed world that we're gonna be okay. We're food sufficient already. All of the indicators say, yeah, it's gonna get hotter, but if you just look at that part of the world that is in the developed world, Europe and North America will be able to manage. The rest of the world's not. And so to me, that's the bigger ethical issue, is as citizens of this world, do we care? enough to do that? Do we care enough about the rest of the world, the rest of the population of this world that will not have it as good as we do to do something about it? To me, that's the bigger question. And to me, if we don't solve that, eventually it will be solved for us, because as you know, hunger and inequality also generate war, generate instability. So whether we want to do it or not, we need to do it. But to me, that is absolutely the biggest ethical question is are we going to sit here and be complacent, or are we going to do something about this?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aaron Capelli from UNCK in Flagler. Thank you for being here. I have a question about terrestrial challenges tied to crop innovation. So, like coastal farm areas of subsidence and saltwater intrusion,
Yep.
And also the Gala aquifer being depleted in the Midwest.
Yes.
How is that creating challenges for seed development, like creating salt-resistant crops or water-resistant crops, or also maybe even introducing crops like millet or sorghum that are more adaptable to dry land agriculture? Is
Yes.
Corteva looking at those problems, and what's the status on some of that?
Yeah, so I think you hit on a lot of things in that question. It's about crop diversity, and that's something that absolutely we are looking at. We have, many different crops. We do have a great sorghum business and also sell millet, and so those are crops that are probably going to be important for the areas that are not going to have an abundance of water. But you also look at where we have water challenges right now. And what are we doing? So in some areas, even where we're producing corn that's generally rain-fed, we're more prone to drought and more prone to unpredictable weather than we have before. And so actually, a couple of the things, both the genetics that we're breeding to, we have a product line called Aquamax, which is just, we select those hybrids that can perform in those environments and actually place them in there, and they're much more reliable to go into those drought-prone areas. And then also, again, I think digital will have a huge play in this, as we can understand what is the water level in a field, or even in a small plot area within a field. What is the actual water level? Do we need to turn on the irrigation? Can we just turn it on here and not here? And the whole field of water management, from an irrigation, a crop irrigation, to reduce that water need is maturing very quickly. We're not playing directly in that area with our company. We're playing more in developing the crops that can actually survive, and where we see that crops are going to shift. These markets are going to shift wholesale because water won't be available, making sure that we're developing crops in those areas that can be a fit for those producers. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks
Hi.
for your comments so far and for being here. I'm Amy Hughes. I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund.
Yes.
And I was wondering your thoughts, thinking about the agricultural market, the sector that the predominant commodity is corn, and the conversation so far is largely around food, and wondering from the energy perspective of corn going to ethanol, roughly 40%, how does Corteva think about the demand for land use and the competition between seed and land and chemical use for corn ethanol versus, say, any other type of plant or crop that could be used from that land?
Yeah, so again, a lot of things in that question, a lot of good content there. I think, the economy as we have it right now, we are, when we think of our production, especially in North America, we are a corn country. And so that entire industry has been built. Corn is in everything that we touch practically. And then also in the fuel. So I think, there's a lot of value in having bio-based fuels. Right now, the best or the cheapest, the most abundant food stock for that is corn. Will that be in the future? I would hope that we find other natural energy sources as well. And then I think for corn, actually, if we can continue to increase the productivity on a per acre, that we're either able to free up land that's now grown for using corn, or marginal land that shouldn't be used for growing corn, that's suboptimal for corn, that can then be returned into growing other crops that's not corn. There will be a demand for corn for a long time on this planet. Our whole infrastructure, and when you look at that crop just in terms of the amount per acre of carbohydrate that you can produce, there's very few other crops that can even come close in terms of the productivity. And then as we've developed the genetics of that crop over the last 100 years, and so there still will be a lot of corn from now going forward. I think really a couple things. It's to increase the productivity of that corn on the acres that it's being grown, making sure that we're growing it on the best acres for that, optimizing the production of that so that other acres don't need to be put into corn. Over time, whether corn will continue to go into ethanol for a biofuel, or whether fuels go away and it's all electric cars, still to be determined how that goes, or if there's going to be other crops that will take that niche. But right now, the economics of bio-based feedstocks for biofuels, corn is still winning. So again, this is where all of you are so important as business people to start innovating the policies and the ways that you can incent where we want to go with economic policies. Because farmers and companies like ours will absolutely respond. So if farmers and companies are incented, and that's a durable demand signal, we will change so quickly. And the tools that we have, breeding, crops, diversity, access to our customers, those are all tools that we can use to make these shifts. It's going to be corn for a while until something dramatically changes.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's an important question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation, Wendy. You clearly bring a lot of passion to the topic, and I think the mission of basically trying to feed the world is one that we can all admire. I'm really curious about the emissions aspect of what Corteva does in a climate context. I think agriculture globally accounts for roughly around 12% of global emissions. A lot of that's from cattle. We all got to do better with our diets and avoid that. But in terms of other emissions, we've got very large-scale emissions from fertilizers as well as land clearing. I'm kind of curious around what you think the impacts of bringing extremely high-yield crops to the world is going to have, whether that's increasing actual land clearing in developing countries around the globe, or how this really kind of plays out in all the different ways that it can.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I mean, I think the footprint of agriculture can be used as a positive or a negative in this. And again, we've talked about the competition between feeding the world and emissions and carbon neutral. So, this is a complex space. I think, you can look at it from minimizing the actual acre footprint where we can be super productive on those acres that we're going to be playing. That's one tactic. And then other acres, keep them in more, crops that can be used to draw in more permanent crops, more grasses that you can be used for pastures or just take out of agriculture entirely. So that's one aspect of just concentrating it and then freeing up acres to do more climate-friendly things, because we know as you plant, even within the crops we plant, if we had year-round cropping that could be drawing carbon dioxide, we can take like 2.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That's about 25% of the emissions each year can be drawn down if we're doing this right with crops. So looking at no-till systems, tillage will release a lot of carbon into the system. So as we minimize the amount of tillage we do, even we're looking at systems where we have what we call strip tillage. So the field is left. In a lot of cases there's clover and grasses and things that are just growing, and we only plant the crops in these strips, and that's the only place we touch. And so 80% of the field, that area, is actually permanent. And so even systems like that, I think in the areas where we want to go intense, will help us out. And so I think there's a lot. Actually, there's our company put out a climate challenge last year where we're giving growers, we've dedicated a fund essentially that they'll be able to access to scale the innovations that they're coming with. So again, it's a little arrogant for a company like ours to say, oh, we've got the solutions. The farmers are the ones trying to also adapt and to experiment, and they're actually very creative in how they're doing it. So what we want to do is really help fund them to solve some of these things. So really the challenge is about climate neutral, to be climate positive, actually pulling in carbon. And actually, I think our granular software is also looking at how can we open a climate credit or carbon credit market that's available to farmers who are sustainable, who are actually drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, and you can document that and measure that. How can they trade with companies that are, adding carbon and get kind of a carbon network going? And so I think that I'd love to be a carbon farmer. That would be a great occupation, actually.
Well, I see that we're actually out of time, so I wish we could keep you all day. Can we thank Wendy? This has been an amazing time. Thank you so much.